Hello mathematicians, welcome back to Number Corner. For Number Corner today, we will play the game Draw, Add, and Compare. For this game, you will need your Number Corner book, a pencil, one blue crayon, and one red crayon. Pause the video now to get what you need. Remember, when we play this game, you will record the teacher's score in red and the student's score in blue. You'll be on page 44. Open your book to page 44 now. We won't worry about the bottom of the page. When we play this game, we will play teacher versus the class. We will take turns drawing two cards to decide how many rows and columns to color in on our grid. We each have our own. Then we will write 4 expressions to match each section of the grid. The team with the higher score, the higher total, wins. Remember, when we are writing our expressions, they're a little bit different than equations. An expression is showing us how many of something or how much of something we have. If we look at the expression 3 plus 2, the mathematical symbol of the plus sign tells us that we have 3 plus 2 more of something. We'll practice more with expressions as we play our game. Let's get started. I'll take my turn first to remind us how to play. I'll pick my first card to show how many rows I'll draw or color in. I'm going to color in 7 rows, so I'll mark that on my record sheet. You should mark that on the top of your record sheet too, by your first grid for the teacher. Let's see how many columns. I'll need 6 columns. Let's mark that on our record sheets that we'll need 6 columns. Now, as we mark our rows, we're going to mark with our red crayon. Count the rows with me as we mark them. Starting in the bottom left-hand corner, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows. Now let's go across from where we left off to mark off our columns. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Can you already imagine what our array will look like? I should see some thumbs up. We have a pretty good idea. Let's fill it in. You can pause the video if you need more time. Once your array is filled in, it should look like this. Now we're going to write our expressions for quadrant A, B, C, and D. We want to show how many red squares are filled in each quadrant. If I'm looking at quadrant A, I can either look at my rows or columns. If I'm looking at my rows, I can see that I have 1 row of 5 plus another row of 5. That would give me the expression of 5 plus 5. Now I could look at this in my columns too. I could also write the expression of 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. Now where do I see that? I see that in my columns. I have 1 column of 2 plus a second column of 2, a third column of 2, fourth column of 2, and a fifth column of 2. Either expression shows how many squares I have. How many squares is that in quadrant A? Show a connection if you found 10 squares in quadrant A. Good work. Let's move to quadrant B. What's an expression we could write to show our rows? Now we could write the expression of 1 plus 1. That would show us that we have 2 rows that each have 1 square. That altogether gives us 2 squares. Let's write that down on our record sheets. Let's move to quadrant C. Can you see how many rows of how many squares we have and write an expression? Now if you see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows of 5, that's good thinking. That gives us the expression of 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5. Let's add those all together, counting by 5s. We have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 squares. Write this down on your record sheet. Let's look at quadrant D. Can you write an expression for quadrant D? Now you could write how many rows you see that we have 1 group or 1 row of 1, 2 rows of 1, 3 rows of 1, 4 rows of 1, 5 rows of 1 to write the expression 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals how many? 5. We have 5 red squares in quadrant D. Let's add all of our squares together on our record sheets. Now I can see that in my tens column I have 1, 2, 3 groups of 10. If I look in my ones column, I have 5, 10. 30 plus 10 equals 40. Plus 1, 2 more gives me a total of 42. Write this in your record sheet. For our next turn, you're going to switch to the blue crayon to show your turn. Let's draw your first card for your row. You will have 6 rows. Put that on your record sheet. Let's draw your second card for your columns. You will have 10 columns. Put that on your record sheet. Now let's pick up our blue crayon and mark how many rows we'll color in. Count with me as we mark our 6 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now let's mark our 10 columns. Count with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Do you already have a pretty good idea of what your array will look like? I hope so. Let's color it in. You can pause the video if you need more time. Does your array look like mine? Make sure it does. Now we're going to write our expressions to represent each quadrant. Write an expression for quadrant A, for quadrant B, for quadrant C, and for quadrant D. You can pause the video to write your expressions. Then we'll see if ours match. For quadrant A, did you write the expression 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 to show your 5 columns of 1? Write it down now if you haven't already. For quadrant B, did you write the expression of 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 to show our 5 columns of 1? If you didn't, write it down now. What do you notice about quadrant A and quadrant B? Show a connection if you notice that they're the same. They look exactly the same, so we can write the same expression to show 5 squares in each quadrant. I want you to write an expression for quadrant C and quadrant D. Show a connection if your expressions match mine. If so, good thinking. We can show that we have 5 groups of 5 in both quadrant C and quadrant D. In each quadrant, we have 25 blue squares. Let's add all of our squares together. If we start by looking at our tens, we know that we have 2 plus 2 is 4 to give us 4 tens, which equals 40. If I'm looking at my ones, well, I can add them all up by counting by 5s. We have 5, 10, 15, 20. I'm going to add 40 plus 20. Well, I know that 40 plus 10 is 50, plus another 10 is 60, to show that there are 60 squares in this array. Make sure your record sheet is all filled in. Looking at our totals, I had a total of 42 squares in my array. You had a total of 60. Remember, the person with more squares in their array is the winner. Who won? Congratulations, students. You are the winners. You had more squares in your array. To show your teacher that you played this game today and did some hard thinking writing all those expressions, take a picture of your record sheet and turn it in Seesaw. I'll see you next time for Number Corner.